Hello! Welcome to another episode of the Geotech Hour. My name is Dr. David Bray. I'm the inaugural director of the Geotech Center, and today we're here to talk about global supply chains disrupted, additive manufacturing, onshoring, and the impacts of COVID-19. I'm really excited because we have a very august group of panelists here today to talk about this issue and to think about where the future of supply chains are going. I do recommend that folks join us every Wednesday for the Geotech Hour, every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern, and also available for replay online immediately following the live stream. So now we're going to turn to our panelists today and listen to their thoughts as they set the scene for where the future of supply chains are going. In particular, I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and share their thoughts on where global supply chains are going and being disrupted the most in 2020, and what are the consequences of those disruptions. Meta, first, we're really honored to have you here and join us first time on the Geotech Hour. If you could real quick share a little bit about yourself and your company, and then share your perspectives about where supply chains are being disrupted the most in 2020.
Thank you, David. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Meta Hajar. I'm the CEO of SLM Solutions. SLM Solutions is a company makes 3D printed metal laser powder beds fusion. We basically have machines that prints parts, additive parts in the metal sector. We print from small components to very large components in various sectors: automotive, aerospace, medical, and we basically serve academia as well. So that's the company is based in Lübeck, which is in northern Germany. So and it's my honor to be here for the first time. So really, unfortunately, COVID has impacted everyone, and supply chain specifically is not immune from the disruption of COVID. We really saw a change in the way of thinking in terms of how manufacturers think about their supply chain and how it's impacted, especially in the early days, because it caught almost everyone off guard. And I can speak from firsthand experience. Early around February, March, we couldn't get components for our machines. We resorted to printing them. We printed our own parts. So it forced us to go in a different direction. And then we had many companies reaching out to us for help and support in terms of helping them with their logistics and the parts, and they couldn't get it. And because every supply chain depends on these reliable logistics and the ability to get parts when they need them. So to avoid these late deliveries and others, company were really thinking outside the box. How can we get these parts quickly? You saw the impact on respirators. How do we print them faster? How do we make them quicker? Really, additive was there to help and support and really change the way we do things. And we received inquiries from many different industries. In response to that, actually, we launched an additive alliance against Corona, which connected the different companies in a space that we don't have direct, for example, polymers or other things. We connected different companies together. We even helped the state of Ohio rapidly build metal molding to make shields. So we printed those in days versus weeks or months. So I think we saw a different way of thinking about supply chain, but we also saw a significant disruption that could happen overnight. So that's me and the company, and that's my views on how we saw COVID and the impact on supply chain.
Excellent, and thank you, Meta. And if I could ask you a real quick rejoinder, real quick for our audience, would you say that as a result of this disruption, do you feel like things are now becoming more organized at the grassroots level, more resilient? As we look to what's going to happen in 2021, do you think we've become more resilient, or are there things that still need to be sorted out for supply chains to make them more shock resistant?
Great question, David. I think the way we look at this, I think we still got a long way to go. I think there's a lot of moving parts currently. We see both on the investment and getting that supply chain to where it needs to be. Unfortunately, it takes time to get supply chain ramped up to where you need it to be. Currently, I think there is a way of managing that to the best that we know how, but I think we're going to see a lot more to come on this.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, that's a good segue to Andrea. One, welcome back, Andrea, to the Geotech Hour and the efforts we're doing here at the Geotech Center. And two, if you could share a little bit about your company and your role, and also your perspectives about where we're seeing global supply chains disrupted the most.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks, David, for having me back. These are always great discussions, and I always learn a lot from the other panelists. So thanks for having me here. My name is Andrea Little-Limbago. I'm the Vice President of Research and Analysis at Interos. And we are a multi-factor, multi-tier supply chain risk management company. And so I lead a lot of the research going on, both behind the platform, but then also what's going on around the world. And so it's actually good timing for this question. I just finished doing a survey that we haven't published yet, but I can give you a little bit of an inside scoop, on asking some of these questions. And one of the first ones was, it was about 450 executives across industries, and almost everyone, 98% felt some sort of disruption, and 97% felt some sort of vulnerabilities exposed. So it's a fairly universal across industries impact that's going on. And it's one of those things that we've heard anecdotally. It's nice having some of the data behind it to validate what we were seeing. And a lot of it exactly met it. It was nice to see what your findings are validating that as well. What his experience is more universal. That the logistical component of it was an enormous disruption across the industries. But sort of the moving beyond that, some of the additional ones that are, some of the logistics are starting to get streamlined a bit. That I think that it's going to take a while. But on top of that, some of them are more permanent. 25% were experiencing bankruptcies. And I think as we start, looking ahead, I think that's going to be something that I think we're just on the tip of that. And so suppliers that were once in business are just no longer in business due to this disruption. And that propagates throughout the supply chains. And so that's an issue. Also the geographic location. I think this is something that we're going to be talking about a bit more throughout, but due to export and import restrictions, having to move geographic locations. So that's another disruption that went on. And, sort of the consequences of that, we really are seeing a significant shift in how organizations are approaching their supply chain. I've been saying it for a while. I think 2020 is a major inflection point where how supply chains were done in the past is going to be different than how we're looking at it going forward. There's just so many changes going on, and part of it is a growing reliance on automation, and that's something that majority of respondents said they're going to be leaning towards automation much more so for greater agility and resilience. Just-in-time production, also over a third said they're going to start moving away from that, and so that's something that's been really dominant for decades. And so that's just one of the many switches. And then just onshoring again across the industries, aerospace and energy and manufacturing all were closer in the upper 80s for saying some part of onshoring. It's not everything, and that's something that we need to stress that. But for certain components, thinking about onshoring was really high across industries. And so there are going to be some geographic switches going on. And so a lot of moving parts, just like we've already discussed. So it's a very dynamic time in this industry.
Excellent. And if I could ask you a deeper question on this as well, quick, do you find, is this requiring companies to know their supply chains better and actually have greater visibility to the entire sort of end-to-end of their supply chains? Be interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the vulnerabilities that was exposed, which is this lack of visibility. And so, I think companies know their first tier very well, but when it goes down to second and third, fourth, fifth, and nth tier, the visibility really just hasn't been there. If you think about just how complex supply chains have grown over the last few decades, where global brands have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of suppliers, it becomes very, very hard to have visibility across all of them. And so, when disruptions happen in certain parts of the globe and companies didn't think they had any connection there, it turns out they do. And so they start seeing greater disruptions. And so that is, looking ahead, that is a big priority that we saw, over and over again, is just the desire to gain greater visibility to then gain that agility and resilience. And so that's sort of the foundational component of it. So absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you. Would now like to welcome to the Geotech Hour first-time guest, though longtime friend. I think we've known each other for about 6 or 7 years. But Melvin, could you share a little bit about your background, your company? I think a lot of us will probably know a little bit about it, but share a little bit what you do there. And then what are your thoughts about both the disruptions, but also the future of supply chains and where they might be going?
Sure. Thank you, David. I'm Melvin Greer, and it's great to be on the Atlantic Council Geotech Hour. We have known each other for a while, and I'm glad to say that we're good friends and colleagues. I'm the chief data scientist for Intel, and I'm responsible for ensuring the full portfolio of Intel's artificial intelligence and data science capabilities are applied to our customers' best and most difficult problems. And what I'll tell you is that from an Intel perspective, uh, and I agree with Meta, COVID has been significantly disruptive in the manufacturing and supply chain area. It's disrupted transportation. It's done what Andrea has indicated as well, which is required a more deep and rich understanding of the supply chain and created opportunities for new visibility. But one of the things that Intel has been really, really focused on, and we just published a new report at the beginning of the year. It was a 700-page report called Industrial 4.0, so that we can evaluate the new capabilities and new skills that are required in order to make manufacturing more resilient and to provide a new understanding of what supply chain is and the disruption that it's undergoing. I think in a summary, what we're finding is that manufacturing and supply chain used to be a manual process. Mm. And now, it's evolved into a whole new set of skills. So it involves things that we probably wouldn't normally associate with manufacturing, robotics, the ability to do programming, the focus on artificial intelligence, and of course, manufacturing and systems engineering. And so when we look ahead to manufacturing and the supply chain process, what I'll tell you is a quote from one of our senior researchers around this issue, and her quote is that manufacturing is sexy again. and the reason manufacturing is sexy again is because this transformation is going to have a long and transformative effect on not just additive manufacturing and 3D printing, but in the entire way we think about supporting a supply chain. It's going to require a new set of skills, and things like understanding modern programming languages, having the digital dexterity to leverage these emerging technologies. Certainly a real need to focus on the convergence of additive manufacturing and data science and AI, and then cybersecurity because of the need to multi-source more and more elements of the supply chain. So, we're excited about it. We think that while there are certainly disruptions and a major transformation going on, manufacturing and supply chain sexy again.
Like that a lot. And if I could ask you to dive a little bit deeper, given your data science role and your background, how are you finding that obviously there's a lot of data that we can begin to get, but when you're looking for what's sort of like the most important data that you're going to sort of have greater visibility on, what are you thinking about, Mel, when you're thinking about data and supply chains and where that's going?
Right, so literally there's no data element in the supply chain that's not relevant. Mm-hmm. The question is, what are the supply chain elements that are relevant to the specific problem that you're trying to solve? Is that timeliness? Is that carbon footprint and waste of material? Is that associated with transportation or sourcing new elements in the supply chain? Each of those have a different data set that is going to be relevant to this discussion. And so we're hopeful that people can be very, very thoughtful about how they acquire, manage, store, and use data. This is part of Intel's new vision, and hopefully your users can see my background as part of the rebrand that we announced about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. And our vision is to be the organization that leads other organizations in their ability to harness the potential of data no matter where it is. And so we are quite excited about being able to look at all data sets and then drive down to a hyper-relevant version of that data based on workload and problem set.
Excellent. Sounds like definitely a way forward, and I definitely think it's a way through the disruptions we're experiencing. Thank you for that, Melvin. I would now like to turn to Matthew. Matthew, if there was anyone who probably qualifies as being a fellow plank holder for the Geotech Center, you were there at our launch. And I know this is sort of what we're hearing is music to your ears because you've been having this vision for a very long time. I was wondering if real quick, if you could share both who you are, what your company does, and then what your visions are, both for where we're seeing supply chains disrupted, but also the future supply chains as well.
Thanks, David. Well, yeah, what a road it's been since we started this, talking about these things. And I have to say that what Melvin said about manufacturing being sexy may be one of the only real positives out of this mess. Yeah, whether it's said that way or not, we really believe in building at foundations and not having a supply chain where we don't know what things are made of anymore, because it exposes us to this type of vulnerability that we saw throughout this pandemic. When words like stockpiling became a concern, and how a trade war intersects with the pandemic and all of these issues. So if anything, this has brought it to the forefront. There has been change. Our company, Nanotronics, we've been working in this field for 10 years. We do make inspection, we make robotics, we manufacture ourselves in this sort of vertically integrated, distributed fashion. But we also then work with our customers to improve yields, to help them innovate and iterate faster. So companies like an Intel and companies like the companies represented here, but also genomics companies and other companies that are involved in the COVID effort. And then because of this sort of intelligent factories that we make, we're able now to make some devices that are appropriate to direct response to COVID. And this we were able to do very quickly by sort of streamlining the supply chain through the types of convergence that Melvin spoke of.
Excellent. And if I could ask you, if you're willing to share a little bit more details, you've talked in the past about this idea of AI process control. Could you maybe demystify that for our audience, and what would that mean?
Yeah, I think that when we talk about this AI process control, there were the world of robots that existed before. They were programmed by humans and they were replacing of human work. It was automation. And there was artificial intelligence that did modeling and looked at sophisticated correlations in a manufacturing process. What AI process control does is actually make the factory itself a self-correcting organism. So where humans think and can make moves on the go, and AI has the ability now with new forms of AI, things with reinforcement learning agents and some other types of AI, to be able to make decisions that are not intuitive for humans to do. So now you can optimize for yields, you can optimize for lack of waste, you can optimize for iteration, and give some of that power because of the data you're retrieving and some of the optimization that you get in AI for those machines to make those decisions. So it becomes closed loop, and that closed loop can be certainly reduce the supply chain, or if you have a large supply chain, have it work together within this AI ecosystem.
Excellent. And I like your sort of metaphor of thinking about like how it can be sort of both learning and self-corrective, and then sort of, like you said, bringing smarts to supply chains where in the past it was very human intensive in the past. So thank you for that, Matthew. I'm going to now pivot back to Andrea real quick and sort of ask a question, which is, if we're looking at a world in which we now have this data available, we have computer vision, we have additive manufacturing, 3D printing, how do organizations increase their nimbleness? What would be your recommendation if they were looking for, maybe a CEO saying, I want to increase the nimbleness? What would you recommend to them?
Yeah, well, I think that's great. And I think those are the questions that are being asked exactly right now is, how can we leverage technology to help overcome these disruptions and become more agile and more resilient? And so I think, across the board, these technologies are going to be essential to it. And I think, again, as far as, game changers, in the past, the risk calculus and the cost calculus for being overseas is being altered because of these technologies. And so there are different factors that come into play, but it's just a completely different calculus that's going to have to, that comes into play because of these technologies. And so for a couple of areas that I would prioritize, it gets back to your question on visibility. So for planning and visibility, leveraging the, AI and machine learning and the data-centric approach to really to overcome some of those blind spots that are out there and really know what's in your ecosystem. And I think, before you can address a lot of these other issues, you really need to, it's know thyself. You need to know where you are, where your entire network is, and have that foundation. And then you can figure out what needs to be, course corrected, and where you need to have alternate suppliers, where you need some, more flexibility, where you may have bottlenecks and concentration risks, all those kind of things. And that's again where AI and machine learning can come into play so strongly, because it's very hard to visualize and to see where those might exist without without the help of computer interaction. And so I'd say that, once you have that foundation built, though, then really looking at more of the continuous monitoring. And that's something that we hear over and over again, and something that I think this disruption has made highly evident, is that needing that continuous monitoring, because as disruptions propagate throughout a network, it doesn't happen all at once. There's some time component to it. Sometimes it can move fast throughout your network. Sometimes it's, sometimes it's a slower ebbing. So just having that monitoring, and again, leveraging the technology to have that. And then finally, with the discussion about just-in-time production, which I think that's something that I think people didn't really think would change, and because there is just this super optimization, super efficiencies, that the hyper focus on that, and just the hyper focus on specialization, just-in-time production almost seemed like it was here to stay, and I think that that's switching. And so for it to switch, though, and to still enable the efficiencies and the cost benefits, I think that's where technology can come into play to make available either onshoring or nearshoring, or just the moving around of your entire supply chain if needed. I think the technology is going to be essential to help with the cost calculus of that, because what used to be out of reach may no longer be, because of anything from 3D printing to just the better optimization of your supply routes and so forth.
Excellent, and I liked how you shared that it's both, like you said, physician know thyself, supply chain manager know thyself first, and then start thinking about your different levers you can pull in terms of how and when you produce it, where you produce it. These are things that can help pare down some of your risks. So thanks for that. And Matthew, maybe sort of building upon that same question that I asked Andrea, as you know, we have a Geotech Commission. It has 4 members of Congress, and we're looking at recommendations for what the US can do regarding data and technology. And so maybe if I could ask, if you'd be willing to share, if you were asked by the Geotech Commission to make your recommendations to the commissioners on what the United States could do to foster more resilient and more shock-resistant supply chains, and maybe possibly even more trustworthy supply chains, what would you recommend to them? Oh, and I think you...
Oh, sorry, I just unmuted myself. Thanks. Well, yeah, I think that government has often been a step behind. We've noticed in this. Now is a chance to realize that we need to plan for a change in some regards. And the main thing I would say is that not to compartmentalize what a government budget is. When we talk about safety and security, it's no different. And this is why when you talk about supply chain, it's no different than talking about manufacturing. And talking about safety and security and manufacturing is no different than talking about artificial intelligence. So taking a specific factory model and looking at how that supply chain works, both funding that and opening barriers, however you can to make that happen, instead of siloing investments and regulations across many different fields, to realize that it is convergent. A factory that builds things that are necessary for Americans, for the world, whether it's during a pandemic or whether just in general to see innovation occur, requires a holistic thinking that doesn't currently happen. That's going to take some funding, but it's also going to take, really tearing down some regulatory barriers in some areas where we think, trade policy does affect it. Looking at privacy issues affects. These are all part of the same.
I really like how you shared that, and thinking about it, I mean, yeah, no other organization would have 50 different stovepipes that are each trying to do their own manufacturing supply chain AI strategy, yet we seem to have that happen, partly because, again, the founders wanted it's checks and balance system, but we are surprised when we're trying to have each of the 50 different elements do their own thing. It's actually being very ineffective. So I like your recommendation, Matthew, of let's think about a holistic strategy. Let's think about funds that go with it. Let's try to tear down the silos and make this actually sort of a challenge across a whole of society challenge, as opposed to individual agencies trying to grapple with that. So then, Melvin, turning to you. There's been some talk about how do we have trust in supply chains, and how can possibly additive manufacturing and other types of innovations in supply chain help improve trust in supply chains. Do you have thoughts on that, Melvin?
Absolutely. I think when we consider how far additive manufacturing and supply chain management has moved away from a physics-based approach to a data-centric approach, we can see that there's a need to refocus on the extension of the security model and the reorganization of a trust relationship through the entire manufacturing and supply chain environment. We talked a little bit about the skills that are associated with this new data-centric approach to manufacturing and 3D printing and supply chain. But when you consider this data-centric approach, it now brings with it all of the IT components that any other data-centric approach independent of its application would inspire one to think about. Cybersecurity is one of those, cloud computing is another one of those. And then when we look at the convergence specifically of these data-centric technologies to supply chain, and we envision this idea of additive manufacturing that's based not necessarily on where the manufacturing process needs to be or is, but where the user is moving data to that location. So now, through 3D printing capabilities and additive manufacturing capabilities, we can now inspire printing closer to the user with less carbon footprint, less waste, higher efficiencies. Now, for sure, the data-centric approach and the more traditional physics-based approach, they are mutually exclusive. In fact, we would say that they're complementary. But in fact, this idea of using data to drive the supply chain process is really going to take advantage of the lower cost of entry for additive manufacturing. Now, before, it used to take really, really specialized training and a huge capital investment in order to develop additive manufacturing capabilities. Now, those barriers to entry are much, much lower. We have a handle on some of the skill sets. And so an example of this activity is one that we focused on at Intel, and we're trying to converge on this additive manufacturing supply chain and AI concepts. What it resulted in, and we added a couple of other ones, I'll talk about those in a sec. We infused this idea of autonomous capability into that mix. And what we ended up with was a $50 open autonomous robot that can be manufactured anywhere in the world. And one of the things that is a trend, right? Because imagine $50, and the software is free. We've actually posted the software on GitHub so that anyone can now download that software and improve on our design using our basic technologies and basic capabilities. But I think what it highlights is not only the convergence and influence of a data-centric approach, but this now new and collaborative capability that allows people to take the best designs, use them much like software designers reuse software to increase efficiency in software performance and optimizations, and do the same for the manufacturing and supply chain process.
Excellent. And I look forward to when I have a 3-year-old right now, maybe in a few years, he'll be ready to maybe start seeing if he can build that robot himself. And I like what you were saying, Melvin, about the data lens allows you to think about security, allows you to think about trust, and also what Matthew mentioned about privacy, also about thinking about synergies across different units, and what Andrea talked about, which is continuous monitoring, which is a term we've heard from cybersecurity in the past, but now we can take continuous monitoring from cybersecurity and we can apply it to the entire supply chain. So thank you for that. So Meta, same sort of similar question. What are you seeing in terms of what are possible challenges as well as possible opportunities with increasing trust in additive manufacturing and supply chains?
Yeah, there is no reason, to be honest with you, David, that rethinking supply chain as exists today. So I think, if you step back and you look at how we do it today, it's really, really extremely expensive, resource intense. We spent a lot of tools. A lot of companies spend a lot of tools trying to keep the warehouses. What's in the warehouses, where is the inventories, and the costs associated with that. That's on the supply chain side of it. The other thing is, there's no way we can continue this path because it just doesn't work going forward. If we decide to disrupt this technology, what do we need? We need a way of manufacturing locally, faster, quicker. And not only that, so the new technology is going to allow us to go and fail faster, right? Go make the parts quickly, go test it, go quickly. And then you go from this 6 months, 8 months lead time that's coming in from, I don't know what region, and by the time it gets to you, then you try it, you test it, it doesn't work, you wait another 6 months again, and now we want to disrupt this way of doing things and the entire supply chain. Now, in addition to that, you'll have a components that you are making is fully digital, right? You go from a digital world and you send it directly to manufacturing, which is an additive manufacturing, which takes those digital designs and prints on real hardware. Now, the way we also doing this is, if let's take, for example, the way how SLM is doing it. So we print layer by layer. Each layer, we take 20,000 layers, and each layer we take data of each that layers, and you get that data. We have more data than we can have capability to analyze today.
I'm sure.
And so we are trying to get there, right? So we have more data than we can. The machine itself has some significant number of sensors in it that capture your oxygen levels, captures the quality of the lasers and the density of the parts. You can tweak them, you can modify them on the spot. So as I see it, in terms of, you should have much more disruption coming into the supply chain that allow us to go further, faster, innovate much quicker than the next guy. And I think definitely with the safety and the data that comes with it, there's more capabilities you can do. And I think as we go forward, I think we're going to see more different supply chain that you see today or you've seen in the past.
Excellent. So you're calling for a supply chain revolution. It's long overdue. Hopefully it'll get here soon. So maybe that's a good segue to, I'll go to Matthew and then back to Meta on okay, so let's say we do get charged with re-envision the supply chains, but more importantly, make the pitch to either public sector leaders, private sector leaders, or even the public. Matthew, what do you see in terms of, like, what does this mean for national security? Does it improve it? What does this mean for reduced carbon footprints? Matthew, first your thoughts, and then Meta after that.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference to all of those things that you say. I've said for a long time that the next great company should not be that is built in a dorm room, should not be a social network, but should be a factory, and that's where additive should lead to. That's where security that is tied to small, controllable, even black box control. Could lead to. And of course, the smaller the space that you're building, the less waste you have, the less transportation costs, all of these things. This isn't quite there yet, I've noticed with this. I think that I'm more impatient than most people, but I think we all feel a sense of urgency and impatience here. I think that we become good inventors, and people, I really think that over the last months, it's 3D printing and additive in general has opened up a sea of inventors, and people felt free to do this. Now, making actual manufacturing of parts and of entire things that could scale at a large level has been more of a challenge still that we have to face. So it's going ahead and taking that creative risk that we've done to invent and now do it for actually, improving process control, improving the way things are made so that we're in full production mode now, with these smaller supply chains. It will be more secure. It certainly will be better for the environment.
So real quick before I go to Meta, Matthew, I know you've actually had an experience where you were actually, your company was helping out with producing something related to COVID-19. Could you share real quick to make this tangible for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we started a sort of subsidiary, a health company, during this, from our company that, here we make, as you heard, these, ways to train people quickly to be able to work with artificial intelligence to make these corrective actions. We started to make a non-invasive breathing device that, keep people out of ICU, can help with, giving us security in a time when we're insecure for an unknown virus. And we found that just to make this thing that we were hoping to make, it involved an incredibly complex supply chain. We were able to move really quickly, 90 days to emergency use approval, because we were able to design quickly, do what Meta says, fail fast on a bunch of things in actually 3D printing parts, trying them out, finding the right ones. This would have taken far too long, and there were not American suppliers to do it. And we did that by using AI and additive. Now, we do now mold things and do things, in other ways, because production speeds need to be increased, and there needs to be innovation that occurs in that space. But we couldn't have done it without artificial intelligence for controlling, and we couldn't have done it without additive in this type of in this speed at all, or with a larger supply chain.
Excellent. Well, thank you for everything that you're doing, and as a positive change agent, it really gives me hope. So thank you, Matthew. And Meta, sort of same questions for you. First, if you were to make the case to the public as to what are the benefits involving either security or carbon footprint, and then two, I know you mentioned what you were doing in Ohio. If you could also share maybe your example as well, that would be great.
Yeah. So let me touch on carbon footprint. In the digital, this is a manufacturing in a digital world you could literally use fully renewable energy, because it's electrically powered equipment that you can use fully renewable energy to produce parts. You don't have to go to other types of energy sources that harms the environment. So those are one ways to think about how the new technology is really changing the landscapes. Now, the other thing is also it allows, when you look at the students, the engineers, the scientists that are coming in, that have these tools that have capability to innovate different ways of doing things in terms of the products that we currently use. So, and I think you'll see a lot more and more. We're going to see more and more people thinking about how I design it with additive or freedom of design to allow me to produce it faster, quicker, and that gives you the freedom to do that. Now, this also helps us localize, right? So now you have the capability, in some cases, buy your own printer and then make your own parts. Even small shops or big shops, we don't have to wait on these large manufacturing, casting or forging to produce that for you. So you could do that locally. And with that, you can even help with this type of shipments. Think about car parts and industrial equipment that's being shipped worldwide today in cargoes. We're looking at probably in the US alone, car parts are probably 8,000 metric tons probably shipped a year or something like that. Right. Imagine, and that's all, shipped through, cargo ships, most of them. So you take that all out, and you're gonna see some significant improvement to the environment. Now, the other thing we have to also think about is geopolitical changes. Today, I'm in Germany. We start thinking differently with our customers about, we got a Brexit coming up. So what do we do differently? Should I, stock this, or should I move my assembly differently? So pandemics, geopolitical stuff, the freedom of, I think, in the way of doing manufacturing in the future with additive is liberating in terms of allows you a lot of freedom. That includes also on the security side as well. So I think all of these things are really changing the way we do things, and it gives the freedom to do manufacturing differently.
Excellent. And so if I could ask as a real quick rejoinder, you mentioned you did an effort in Ohio to help them out. So maybe make it sort of tangible for our listeners. Could you give us a little bit more
Yeah.
details on that?
So so the state of Ohio reached out to us, and they asked us, to help them build. So we do metals, so we don't do polymers. So they needed to produce face shields, and this is during the peak of the pandemic, when everyone is trying to get some supplies. Now they couldn't get the injection molding. It's made out of metals. Usually that comes from Asia or somewhere. They couldn't get that, and if they want to produce it with a traditional manufacturing, it would have taken weeks and weeks or months. We didn't have that much time. So what we ended up doing is, I said, give me the design. Let's look at what you're trying to do. Let's put it in our printer. We printed within days, and we supplied them with that. They use that injection molding to make the face masks, and that's the shields. I'm sorry, the face shields. And they produce hundreds and hundreds of those shields, and gave them to the people that need them in the front line.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you for everything that you're doing and your organization's doing as well as positive change agents. Thank you. So Andrea, we've heard these examples. We've heard how things are changing. I know you put a lot of thought in this. First, where do you see the additional benefits? And then two, you have experience seeing how Washington, D.C. moves, sometimes doesn't move, sometimes, I don't know, goes somewhere else, who knows where. What would be your recommendation for what would be a grand strategy in this space that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, well, I'm glad that Meta brought up geopolitics, because that's such a core component of all this, because the technologies are essential. I think we just have heard in numerous examples already of how vital these technologies are to our national security, our economic security, to our societal health, all aspects of it. But of course, they come also with additional risks, right? So with like all technologies bring the benefits, there are also some risks that come along with it. Mm-hmm. And so the technologies are great, but we do need guardrails. And so I love Melvin mentioned that manufacturing is sexy now. So in the DC policy world, industrial policy is sexy now.
Oh my!
And so industrial policy is back, and that's one and that's something that we haven't heard for a while. But if you look at what's gone on over this year, we're starting to see guardrails come in place with technology, and so where technology has really exponentially taken off, it's a fairly well known that that policy lags behind. Policy is trying to catch up quickly right now. So first, my best recommendation for any of those folks in the tech world: help out the policymakers, to ensure they get it right, because right. Policies are coming. And so, just a couple examples, offhand, who makes these technologies is becoming more and more important. And so, what we're seeing is, we've talked a little bit, I think, in this stage and then in other areas about the fracturing of the internet, and so into the various geopolitical spheres. There are also the technospheres that are similarly dividing, and so who makes what becomes a very big deal. And so the policies are really starting to focus on who is making the AI, the computer vision, facial recognition, what companies are making them, what are their linkages to foreign governments potentially, and that's what we've seen already quite a bit in this year alone. There have been over 100 different Chinese companies that have been put on Commerce's restricted entity list just in this year. And so if you happen to have one of those companies in your supply chain, again, it gets back to the visibility point, they could be several tiers down, that still is within your supply chain. And so there are compliance issues that come along with it. But on top of that is the national security concern. And that's what the concern is, that they're providing basically Trojan horses into various corporate networks. And so those technospheres are a big issue. And, just briefly touching upon the environmental aspect, one of my concerns is as we start seeing the various technospheres start to emerge, does that mean that we're going to have limited cooperation between China and the US on the environmental front? And so what the implications of that might be. And so that's, I think the good news is that across supply chains, we're hearing a lot of people talk about carbon footprints and so forth and trying to get to net neutral or net zero. I do worry about how the geopolitics might actually infringe upon state level cooperation on the environmental level.
Excellent. And if I could ask you a real quick rejoinder on that, recognizing, who knows how things will play out in November, who knows what 2021 is going to look like in the United States. But if we were to look for like what would be a hub of sort of informing policymakers and expertise in the US government on these topics, would you say is that the National Institute for Standards and Technology? Is that Commerce? Is that somebody else? Like, as Matthew just mentioned, we've got many different buckets, and recognizing, again, none of us have a perfect crystal ball. But
Yeah.
Andrea, do you have any thoughts about where we might see those hubs emerge?
Well, I mean, so we're starting to see them emerge, and the interesting thing is because it's fragmented, right? And so we're seeing that the Pentagon's putting out some of their own lists. We have State Department with their lists. We have Commerce. We've got Treasury doing some of their sanctions lists. So it is a lot. We really need to have greater cooperation there. But what actually might be a driving function could very well be that at the global level, we're starting to see democracies want to create more of the trusted networks. And so the UK came forth, introducing the 10-country pact of democracies for 5G and trusted networks within the 5G. And so that could end up being that hub. I mean, we'll see. I mean, that could be at the international level, but I think more so that'd be a forcing function within the United States. But I don't know. I don't know exactly where. I think we're going to see a lot of smaller hubs popping up because that's what we're already seeing right now. And so we do need to get back to the point of having more of the grand strategy across it. The cyber space solarium made dozens of recommendations, along these lines as far as the various regulations and so forth, and entities to help drive that. So, I mean, we'll see. I think we're going to continue seeing a little bit fragmented. But to your point of the election, I think regardless of who gets elected, supply chain risk is going to be a big issue. We've already seen that going on in the current administration, and the Biden administration also has put forth their supply chain risk strategy. So this isn't a risk that's going to go away anytime soon, regardless of what happens.
Wow, we actually found a bipartisan topic.
It is a very narrow Venn diagram or overlap.
Excellent. Well, thank you for this insights, and yes, thank you for everything you do with your leadership, Andrea, on this, and the Atlantic Council will try to help defrag these increasingly fragmented efforts to bring them together.
That'd be great.
So Melvin, sort of same thoughts as to what would you say are the benefits of additive manufacturing to the public, and how would you share it? And then sort of as you were to look to the future, what are ways that we can maybe go forward together more intelligently with sharing information from the private sector with the public sector and vice versa on strategy here?
Sure, I do agree that with my colleagues that we need to have a more thoughtful approach to how we move forward on supply chain, just because of the nuances associated with both technology development and investment, as well as geopolitical issues. But I will say that the democratization of the core technologies that are now driving this transformation in supply chain is going to have a revealing impact on our go forward strategy. As machine learning and deep learning, machine capabilities and camera vision move forward, this idea that we have manufacturing solely in the hands of these very large manufacturing organizations is not likely to continue going forward. And in fact, when we look at some of the use cases, we can see some of the benefits already, right? So we can see personalization of medical devices that are creating new and enhanced innovative solutions that are not coming from huge pharma and huge manufacturing organizations in prosthetics. When we think about the capabilities associated with deep space exploration and the ability to manufacture products on demand in real time simply by shipping a data file to a new location. These kind of things make the benefits of additive manufacturing and the convergence of artificial intelligence and data science really, really important. When we take a look at specifically these convergent areas, and I'll just identify three major considerations and trends we see going forward. One of the studies we did, we showed that about 30% of all AI implementations in manufacturing are really focused on the maintenance of the machinery and the production process, right? So just think about that. We're now talking about mean time to failure, the ability to on-demand change out manufacturing capabilities without impacting the supply chain, looking at increased and innovative ways to measure and predict failure, Of course, this would have a material impact on in-theater warfighters that are trying to do their jobs based on a readiness and logistics capability that is highly dependent on the movement of material and the ability to keep that material in place. So that logistics capability is part of the whole process. I think the second thing we're seeing is a really important trend is this use of generative adversarial networks. Now, I know there's this relationship with GANs that sometimes is contentious and sometimes is not contentious. Certainly on the contentious side, we see media manipulation. But
Bye.
on,
Yes.
yeah, but on the manufacturing side, generative adversarial networks are helping to create whole new design that we would never have been able to come up with without artificial intelligence and data science. I mean, the ability to get to an optimized design on a new innovative part in the human context would take a long, long time. But if I have a generator and a discriminator that are constantly balancing these new optimizations and driving brand new ways to design and manufacture a part, we're seeing 20, 40% performance improvement over some of the human only design parts, which, is kind of, it's absolutely amazing, right?
Yeah. And again, you don't have the machine do the work for you. Fascinating.
Exactly. And then, of course, this convergence of AI and camera vision and computer vision. Being able to take a look at quality and being able to look at the principle of design, these things where we are pushing more and more on the tolerances of manufacturing process. And are we able to create this idea of biomimicry inside the context of the manufacturing process such that we can use a camera vision or computer vision capability to assess the veracity of and the quality of a part that's being manufactured. Now, these are and many others, right? So we're seeing lots and lots of new design processes that are being blended from the computer science part of the equation along with the additive and supply chain part of the equation.
Excellent. And well, thank you, Mel, for everything that you do as a positive change agent as well. I know you've been leading in this space for a while. And for me, it's fascinating to see because I wonder, like, whose job is it? Because this is, we're going back to manufacturing and going back to industrial. And it really does look like you're very well positioned as a data scientist to be able to lead this because it is so data intensive. So now to our panelists, we're now about 6 minutes remaining. So we're now shifting to the lightning round. For those who longtime watchers of the Geotech Hour, this is when we circle back to give 2 to 3 tweet links. So we're looking for fairly short recommendations for either public sector leaders or private sector leaders based on our topic. And so what I'm going to ask each of our panelists to do is think about if you were to give 2 to 3 tweet links recommendations for action steps going forward involving rethinking supply chains. I mean, I heard from Meta, we need a supply chain revolution, and it sounds like the early seeds of that revolution is getting started here. I also heard from both Matthew and Melvin when they were talking about, let's think about how to make it essentially smarter supply chains, almost as if they were alive or borrowing from biomimicry. And as Andrea says, it's going to happen. Whatever the outcome is in November, regardless of the United States, 2021 will bring changes. So first, Andrea, if you could give 2 to 3 tweet links recommendations, what would they be?
Yeah, I think aiming more for the tech crowd, the technologies don't exist in a vacuum. Again, industrial policy is coming, some regulatory shifts are coming, and so you can either help shape it or be shaped by it. And so that'd be the first one. Second, still same focus, I guess, would be really focusing on human-computer interaction. And with these new technologies, it's a chance to get security and privacy better. I don't know if we'll ever get it right because I think that's going to be perhaps in the eye of the beholder, but doing that better and baking it in versus having security and privacy as an afterthought, especially with such data-centric components to all of this. And then third, really thinking about these shifts are coming. Previous behavior doesn't forecast future behavior because we're at such a big inflection point. So there will be a new equilibrium that emerges. So just think about how to adjust with nearshoring, onshoring, multiple supply chains even coexisting at the same time. And so that's sort of the world that we're looking at. And so don't build policies based on how the world has been. and actually hopefully help shape it to how we want it to be. I mean, that's the other opportunity, right? it's our chance to help shape it and to make it better. So
I love what you said, and particularly about, you either get shaped by it or help shape it. Now's the time to help shape it. So thank you for that. Melvin, similarly, 2 to 3 short tweet length recommendations you would have?
Yeah, sure. Drive interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary collaboration.
Mhm.
Develop a bias for action, because these things are not standing still, and you definitely don't want to find yourself trying to play catch up. And then focus on the new skills that are required that are going to have a material impact on your success.
Very well said. And I think you even achieved the old school 140 characters or less tweet recommendation. So kudos to you, Melvin, for achieving that. I really liked what you also were emphasizing, similar to Andrea, which is bias for action, because this is coming and you either make action or you get overwhelmed by it. So thank you, Melvin, for that. Meta, similarly, your very short recommendations as well.
Look, I think I fully agree with Andrea and the team here that either we lead or we will be led by this technology. It is, use it as an opportunity. This is, you can look at it as a threat or an opportunity. This is an opportunity for many generations to come. I think the thing that I really look forward to is policies that can help shape and improve the technology forward and move us forward beyond just the politics.
Excellent. And that you threw down the gauntlet again. Yet again, not just a revolution, but maybe we do need to figure out a way to do policies that get beyond the politics, that actually try to help shape a better future. So who knows, maybe come early 2021, we could actually try to find a way to convene this, because I do think we either get on board with this bus or the bus is going to overrun us. So, all right, Matthew, bring it home for us. You get the closer.
I'd say your factory can be your supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a major point here. I think an inventor is now a producer.
Mm-hmm.
This is a chance for the first time for us all to see that come true. And things do not exist as individual inventions. They only exist when they're brought into the world together through policy, through innovation.
Fascinating. And I loved your, again, this is a revolution happened. Your factory, can be your supply chain. I love what you also said about thinking about inventors are now producers, probably in the first time in history that it's really been linked. And like you said, none of us, it's almost like no person is an island. None of this happens in a vacuum. We are all connected. So with that, I want to thank each of you. This has been a very tremendous panel. I also want to thank our audience for listening and invite them to join us next week for the next Geotech Hour, again, Wednesdays from 12 noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. The one that we're going to have on September 30th is space economics and sustainable space infrastructure. Obviously, 3D manufacturing and additive manufacturing plays a role in that. But again, big thank you to each of our panelists, Matthew, Melvin, Meta, and Andrea. This has been a fascinating insight to the future. I look forward with hope to 2021, and thank you for all that you do as positive change agents.